Okay, I think we're live.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hello and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this discussion about building secure non-monogamous relationships. My name is Zach Budd, and I'm honored to be asked and chosen to sort of moderate this little discussion here. And I'm doing so from the ancestral territories of the Akokisa, Karankawa, and Atacapa tribes. And if I could, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel here so we can kind of jump in and get discussing here. So first off is our esteemed author, the writer of the book Polysecure, which we'll be discussing today. This is Jessica Fern from Boulder, Colorado. Jessica is a psychotherapist, public speaker, and trauma and relationship expert. In her international private practice, Jessica works with individuals, couples, and people in multiple partner relationships who no longer want to be limited by their reactive patterns, their cultural conditioning, insecure attachment styles, and/or their past traumas. She prefers to help them to embody new possibilities in life and love. Along with us, we also have Nava Smolash, excuse me, who sometimes writes under the pen name Nora Samaran. And Nava is a faculty member in the English department at Douglas College in Vancouver, Canada, and the author of another wonderful book, by the way, which is entitled Turn This World Inside Out, The Emergence of Nurturance Culture. And Nava also wrote part of the foreword to Jessica's book. And then, of course, we have with us Eve Rickert, who wrote the other part of the foreword to this book today that we'll be discussing today. And Eve is the co-author of More Than Two, which is a well-known practical guide to ethical polyamory, and is also the co-founder of Thorn Tree Press. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome, and yeah, let's have this discussion. If you guys want to jump in and say hi individually, I guess we'll let Eve go first.
Sure. So I'm Eve. Thorn Tree Press is also the publisher of Polysecure, which just arrived a couple days ago. I'm really happy about that. I'm joining from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And the tale that you saw a few minutes ago is Gigi, and she may come in and out. Before I launch into my sort of intro to our whole talk, how about I let each of you say hi to? Jess? Nava?
Nava.
Either, whatever you prefer. I figured that the main person goes last and the headliner will go before, but it's you.
Go ahead, Nava.
I'll go.
Okay. I'm Nava. No, what are we doing?
Go ahead, Nava.
It's like when you go to in a hallway and you like can't decide which side to pass on.
We're gonna be like.
You go, Nava.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Nava. I'm really happy to be here. I love this book, and I am coming to you from the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, also known as East Vancouver. And I'm super happy to get to discuss this book today, to be in conversation with these amazing people. Yeah, and thanks, Zach, for hosting, and Jeff for being here. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. And of course, our esteemed author.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Fern. I'm coming from the native land of the Arapaho tribe, also known as Boulder, Colorado. And I'm just so happy to be here with all four of us. Four of us.
Yeah, we can include the cat in that. So
great.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
She's sitting just off screen right now.
Gotcha.
Is she glaring?
So.
She has a great glare.
No, well, yeah, actually now she is, because I just left her. So, if we're really lucky, she'll come and look at the camera at some point during the call.
All right.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, yeah, so I would love to just kind of jump into the talk. Of course, I have a million questions, but I'm trying not to make this about me. First of all, I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to really listen to the book and kind of just hear, and of course try to do that thing where I'm applying it to my own life and my own journey through non-monogamy. But as Eve and Nava sort of both wrote a little bit in the foreword, which really kind of sets up this book very, very well. I figured I'd let Eve kind of start with a little bit of how this book sort of plays in right after More Than Two, which of course is briefly discussed in the foreword itself in the intro. So if you want to, Eve, how you kind of feel polysecure as it is now sort of relates to the differences in what more than two kind of accomplished or didn't accomplish for that matter.
Yeah. So that's actually, as you mentioned, what Nava and I wrote about in the forward. And uh, More Than Two was written in 2013, published in 2014, and it was coming in at a time when the predominant style of polyamory was still a hierarchical style, a prescribed hierarchical style, and what that did, and I didn't have the language for this at the time. I have it now because of everything that's happened since then in Jess's book, but it essentially sacrificed some people. It treated some people's attachment needs as less important than other people's attachment needs. It basically said, like, among these different relationships, these attachment needs matter and these are lesser. And human biology just doesn't function that way, right? Like, it's actually not. It's nice to, imagine a world where we're all robots and can make that work, but it actually it doesn't, and it was hurting people. So so More Than Two really came out of a time when people were questioning that model, and trying to establish new ways of thinking about relationships. And it was also the same time that, like, solo polyamory was coming to the fore. And so in a book, we really tried to take that apart and say, well, how can I can say that the place where I was coming from and what my intention was with the book, although I know this isn't how it's always been received or used in relationships, but my intention was to try to help give people tools to where everybody's needs would matter and could be honored. But it was also happening at a time, sorry, I'll try not to talk too long here, monologue, but we were very focused on language, and this was really important, I think, at the time, because it was coming at a time when consent culture conversations were sort of exploding all over the place. And so we were really focused on consent, autonomy, agency, and left out a lot of what's now in this book, which is about the actual tools that you need to build security and the underlying sort of need for that. So I met Nava in 2016 after her. I'll just like repeat the whole forward here, but like her essay on nurturance culture had gone viral. We met each other online and then found out we lived across the street from each other and started having all of these discussions about my work, her work, how they intersected, and it really evolved my thinking about it. So when Jess came along with this book proposal, I was like, oh my God, this is like, and I saw her talk, and it was just like her talk on attachment security and polyamory. And I was like, this is what we need right now. Right. So that's how we all ended up sitting together here on this call and involved in this book.
Yeah, glad you guys did that. That's fantastic. Nava, real quick, let me make sure I get this correctly. Having briefly looked over the essay and started your book, but haven't finished it. Basically, the opposite of rape culture is the nurturance culture, correct? Okay, which is fantastic. I mean, you may know, I am known as someone who's a consent educator, and I work hard at trying to live in a consent culture, but I like the idea of a nurturance culture being the opposite of a rape culture. And so I guess I would ask why the attachment model itself, or the secure attachment model, and that's for whoever wants to chime in. Obviously, we'll get to Jess here in a moment, but I'm curious why, particularly, Eve and Nava, that was the thought that you all had as far as looking into non-monogamy. And whoever wants to go first, that's fine. We can let Eve take a break.
I mean, yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I'm really thinking about it. I feel like Jessica's book is helping paint a richer picture of, I think all of this work has been, for me personally, has been fumbling towards learning. Like, I write to learn. I write as I'm thinking. It's always a process. It's not like I write that essay. that I wrote, I didn't write it because I had already finished figuring all that stuff out. I wrote it because I was in the middle of some extremely confusing experiences, and I was trying to understand why they were happening. So it was really a learning process. And I feel like this book is, every page, I'm like circling things and being like, oh, that's amazing. And then I turn the page and I'm like, that's amazing too. Because it's really going in great depth into what it means not only to respect each other's autonomy, but also to respect one's our need for one another. And for me, I was trying to come clear that even someone who asks permission before they touch me, and doesn't assault me, could still do massive damage to my psyche. And vice versa. I was wanting to understand ways that I've harmed others over my lifespan without fully knowing how or why or what was going on, when I had the best of intentions and yet was struggling with something, and then that had happened to me. And so attachment, it took these things that made no sense and crystallized them into a picture that I was like, oh, there's actually a reason for all of this. We have neurological, physiological causes, and we can actually understand why people do the things they do. For me, it was miraculous, revelatory. And I think it's taken this a whole new level of richness. She's taken it further than I had. And I'm super excited about this book.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it really comes down to this question of interdependence. If, in order to trust others, for me, boundaries are about trust. And in order to trust others, I need both to know that they won't violate me, but also that they won't turn their backs on me in an important moment that's needed. Those are both elements of trust. And I guess secure attachment is about both of those things. Right? Trusting that they'll be there and trusting that you won't engulf one another. It's about that balance, not only one or only the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Eve, do you have anything to add as far as why secure attachment, particularly with non-monogamy?
What can you I feel like there's an end of a question there.
Oh, okay. Well, no, it's because of all the other models we could look at, as far as talking about relationships. Why does secure attachment feel like the one to really sort of bring up in the same sentence paragraph as non-monogamy, particularly? And I'm just curious as to why that was, and it didn't have to be. I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Sorry, for some reason I'm having a hard time parsing the question.
Okay,
why
no problem.
why these two things together for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, why? Like when I look at why this book is important now, and sort of the development of our conversations about how we do our relationships in non-monogamy, they're this little microcosm of these bigger national and global conversations that are happening. And so when I look at where we were in 2013 when More Than Two was written, and where we are now in 2020 with Polysecure, everything that's happened since then, and where and Nava's essay came out right in the middle of that, kind of at the height of things there was all the conversations about emotional labor, Me Too, the variations on the consent culture conversations, the 2016 election that started, so, but why secure attachment in non-monogamy, and why this language is important to me. I actually think that I want to hand this. I want to bounce this to Jess, because I think it gets into one of the things that we wanted her to talk about in the book, which is the thing that she said in her talk that she gave the weekend that we agreed to do this book, and that is a underpinning of the book, is this idea that both monogamy and hierarchical polyamory utilize external structures to create a feeling of security in a relationship, but not necessarily addressing the internal secure functioning of the relationship.
Exactly.
And when I look at the previous literature on polyamory, including More Than Two, I'm like, oh, that's it, right?
Okay.
It's like, it's all of this stuff about
Structures.
Structures. Either this is the structure you need or you don't need this structure, but there isn't a lot. I mean, some of the stuff about secure functioning is there, but not under that name. And I feel like that's so important to name it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
to start to talk about what are the things that we're actually doing with our partners in this relationship to create that security. Yeah.
Great. Cool. Yeah. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and throw it on over then to Jess. So, why particularly the secure attachment model in non-monogamy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it came from personal experience and it came from my professional observations, right? That as I was working with all of these couples opening up, most of them were couples coming, that I would see that just how rocked their attachment system became. And I was trying to understand what was going on. But then when I would work at creating more secure attachment, then were better able to do poly. Right? So but I really saw that when couples were trying to use hierarchy or monogamy to ensure their security, a whole aspect of the relational experience was missing, right? And so I started to see that, oh yeah, but part of the struggle is that I do think that, polyamory, non-monogamy is almost inherently or definitely more insecure of a structure than monogamy, right? It doesn't have all those structural supports of all the ways culture and institution and family and society just support monogamy, right? And then also even just from a simple level of just like not being the only one, right? And of course, in monogamy, there's not really the only one going on too, but polyamory people are explicitly, intentionally going out to meet new people and open their hearts and bodies to new people. And those people can change the game completely, right? And so there is that sense of insecurity. And I do believe that can be a good thing. I think that keeps non-monogamous folks from falling into some like complacent cul-de-sacs that monogamy can get stuck in, right? It can keep a relationship really fresh and present and alive. But it could also be really nerve-wracking, especially if you're dealing with insecure attachment on certain levels.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
That was something that I found also in the book to be really kind of revelatory, that you just were like, she just said it. The whole monogamy or non-monogamy is inherently insecure. And I think that there can be a tendency in some polyamorous relationships and communities to almost towards a form of gaslighting, where it's like, if you're feeling insecure in your relationship, it's like, you're feeling insecure in your relationship, it's because you are insecure in yourself. And all the work has to come back to you to become a secure person, a secure individual, and then you'll be secure in your relationships. And like ignores this whole piece of like, well, first of all, your relationship might actually be insecure. Your partner might not be acting in secure ways. And they actually do have a responsibility to do that. And it's not like, you can't just fix yourself to the point where you're always going to be able to tolerate that. And two, we're in this insecure structure, and so it increases the amount of work that we need to do and like the responsibility to create that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was that beautiful metaphor that came up in the sort of pre-show chat when we were talking, that Zach, you had proposed, the metaphor of a joint that, or was it Jess, that came up, that was that the more flexible a joint is, the more inherently.
Can you say it?
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about the fact that non-monogamy itself is inherently, unstable or less secure or less stable, and but the reason for that is because it also allows a lot more movement and freedom. The same way, and I just used, my anatomy experience to talk about in the body, you've got your very, very stable joints that don't have a lot of movement to them, but then the more mobility and range of motion you have in a joint, the more inherently unstable it is. It doesn't make it bad, it just makes it different. And I think that's the same thing as far as these relationship structures, where we're talking about non-monogamy having much more options as far as iterations and ways it can look. And I mean, there are almost as many different types of non-monogamy as there are people who practice non-monogamy. And so inherently, yeah, it's less stable just because there's just more people. So there's more things that could happen, there are more variables. But it does allow various movements and freedoms and different iterations, and it's not so rigid as monogamy is all that exists, period. That's it. So that's kind of that's the metaphor that I think that came up during the conversation. And go me, I contributed to the discussion, so I feel good about myself. So real quick, I know we've got a couple of questions that we all kind of want to discuss and whatnot, but I wanted to throw something at Jess because I'm moderating and I can do that. In chapter 2 of the book, you used a quote from one of my other favorite authors, Esther Perel, where and you were talking about how there can be too much attachment, where people can kind of feel like they're being imploded upon. So it kind of brings up the question, whether we're talking about monogamy or non-monogamy, how much attachment is enough, and how do you know when you've got too much, secure or insecure? But I'm wondering, because everyone obviously is different, is there a way to tell, when your attachment is healthy or too much or not enough, that type of thing? How would you know?
Great question. I mean, I think initially I would say, well, how do you feel about it, right? I mean, how do you feel about yourself? Do I feel secure in myself, and do I feel good about this relationship? Whether there's a lot of contact or not a lot, because we can have a secure connection with someone we don't talk to a lot, but that feels right, right? So it's really that feeling of, is this feeling right? And if it's not, then looking at, well, is that just my insecure attachment stuff? Or is it a relational issue that's showing up where there's not enough attachment needs being met? And so if people are feeling themselves either push back too much or lean in and try to grasp too much, that can be a sign that the attachment is moving into an insecure place.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So, a couple other questions. Let me find my group of things.
Can I ask?
Go for it. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I have one too. When you're
okay, yeah. Let's ask. I want to ask Jess a question. So
Yeah.
I want to know. So okay, there's. I have two for you, but I'll just ask one for now. Can you talk to us about the nested model? I think it's beautiful and it's powerful, and it integrates both the interpersonal and the cultural and the social, and also up to the political. Like, you talk about structural violence as connected to attachment, and I have never seen a book do that, and I'm so happy that you have, and I would love to hear you talk about it a little bit, particularly the structural, like that belonging in the world in that larger political sense, and how that connects.
Yeah, so in the book, maybe we can even find the page. Attachment, the nested model of attachment and trauma. And if people want to hear a little bit more about it,
88 and 89.
There we go. Someone
can... the nested model. There we go. Yeah, that's
sweet. Yeah.
Socialism.
So we have
79.
Self, then the level of relationship, then home, then local, community and culture, then societal and global. And so last week, Ruby Johnson and I did a talk that went a little bit more in depth on this, and people can see that because I think it's recorded on.
It's on the Thorn Tree Press YouTube channel, as well as the Facebook page.
But basically, I was wanting to just bring in more, that our attachment is impacted by all those different levels of human experience. It's not just the one-on-one interactions. Of course, our one-on-one interactions with our caregivers and our partners are crucial. But, Are we in a community that has violence? Are we in a minority group that experiences structural violence? Are we in poverty? All of those things. Are we in a pandemic, right? At the global level, all of these things are going to impact our ability to be available and responsive and attuned, or the people in our lives to be responsive and available and attuned. And it impacts not just even the relationship attachment, but like you just referenced, with how safe and secure I feel in the world. Because that's the beauty of when we really experience secure attachment. It's not just then with a partner that we feel secure, it's internally and externally. I feel safe in this world and I feel safe in my own skin, right? And there's all those other levels that can impact that level of safety. So I just, yeah.
The recognition of our relationships too, as non-monogamous people, as you mentioned earlier, and the availability of all of those like social rituals that acknowledge this relationship is real and embed it into society are often not available to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I think that connects, for me, some of the conversations that Eve and I have been having over the last few years have been around that for me, the forms of non-monogamy that I had run into socially and that then I, sort of read some of in some of that writing, they talk about our boundaries and our rights, but they don't necessarily talk about our responsibilities towards one another. Like there was this sort of weird idea that I think Eve has no longer maybe thinks that maybe you didn't think it even when you wrote it. And the book is that more than two is complicated because it's got two voices in it, right? And there's your voice, I think, does really beautiful ethical things, but it was a collaboration and it's complicated. For me, when I first ran into people who thought no one should ever tell anyone else what to do, and that's the peak of what we're aiming for, I was like, I don't think that's true. Like for me, I think that's true for sex. Of course, no one should ever, like the boundaries that we have around touch are not endlessly expandable to all of our relationships. We have obligations to one another that literally hold our ecological, social, and cultural world together. We don't get to choose those. We're in them and we fulfill them or we fail to fulfill them. I was thinking, if you bring a houseplant home and then you're like, theorize that the plant doesn't need water, you can stop watering it, but it doesn't stop needing water. It just dies, And I think if we're what I love about the larger scales of your nested model, like I was saying, page 88, page 89, is that if we think about our relationships of belonging at this larger ecological, cultural, social level, then that means that we're developing bonds that love that you say, we need both sovereignty and connectedness. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah.
I think you have that on 63, that we want, how do we keep our sovereignty while still being related to one another? Where I think a lot of the thinking that was coming out of that moment in polyamory was like, what do I need? And does what I need fit with what that other person needs? Yes, no. If no, walk away. If yes, fine, you can work things out. But it's all very contractual, sort of. And that was just very different from my worldview. And I think your book is a much richer and deeper kind of exploration of that interdependence with sovereignty rather than separateness.
Yeah,
Wow.
and sort of the mom talking about, it's almost like, well, my partner has to just be this puzzle piece that fits into me exactly, and if they don't, then no, thank you.
Anyone can walk away, so there's no problem. Walking away
get a new
solves
relationship.
Right. And it just doesn't account. And I hear a lot of people say that, like, well, you should never ask anyone to change. And I'm like,
yeah,
aren't we supposed to grow together? Like, isn't that the point? Growing and evolving and not just staying as static beings.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Go ahead, Eve.
Can we use that as a jumping? I mean, I think we could end up spending like the rest of this talk on this, but like, so what do consent and boundaries look like in a securely attached relationship? Can we talk about that?
Of course,
Please.
talk about it. Yes. You want to jump in on that?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Oh.
No, I wanted you to do it, Jess, because you're the author. I'm just here. A little bit anyway. So no.
So I think the key with boundaries is seeing what are we trying to do with boundaries, and so much of the focus is about having healthy, but a lot of times we confuse healthy boundaries and they're really rigid boundaries. Right? And how do we balance the dance between being connected and protected.
Yes.
And there is a need to be protected. And so a lot of people with their boundaries, they go too far into connection. And I talk about this in the book, and it goes into loss of self.
Right.
Or fusion or codependency or enmeshment, that end of the spectrum. And then you have healthy autonomy or healthy protection of self. And then that can go too far into rigid boundaries, walled off, inaccessible isolation.
Right.
So that secure attachment is sort of knowing how to stay in the middle, knowing how to go back and forth, and knowing that we need both of them in every other moment.
Wow. I'm sorry. This is the same feeling I had listening to the audiobook as I was, doing whatever. I was just like, hang on, I got to rewind and go over that again because it's, I mean, when we're talking about consent and boundaries, even in secure attachments, I became aware as a consent educator that, I could be using a lot more of this, secure attachment sort of theory and discussion model in my consent educating as well, because I've seen a lot of people trying to develop consent or boundaries, and they end up becoming sort of, rather than ways of making things secure and comfortable for them, ways that end up controlling other people. And so it ends up going outside of themselves. And so rather than being some sort of structure that they set up for their own, I guess, safety or comfort, it becomes an external structure forced upon somebody else in the name of security and consent. And so it is a fine line that's got to kind of be, like you say, sort of narrowly walked. And I think there was a discussion a little bit in the book about, when it's newer folks to non-monogamy, they end up using these external structures to feel safe, but it's more of a control. And you can even talk about, in the hierarchies and stuff like that, rather than actual security. And I think there's a difference there. Is the security versus control of someone else somehow making you securely attached. So yeah, it's wow, again, mind blown. So give me a minute to recover.
Well, I was just thinking about, again, some of the conversations that I've had with Nava, and like there was actually a conversation on your Facebook wall about this happening really recently, but like about that when we talk, I think part of the problem is like the boundaries that we have at the orgy, at the sex party, they're not the same. And the way we get and receive consent in a setting like that, or at work or on the street, it's not the same as in our securely attached, bonded, deeply intimate relationships. And a way that is of a heuristic for getting and giving consent in a setting like that could actually be really damaging in a securely attached relationship. And I think one of the things that Nava has written about that was really revelatory for me is the way that stonewalling and disconnection can be used as a means of maintaining power. So, it's like, well, yes, we all, we need to have the power to, exit a conversation that is hurting us and so on. But like, sometimes people can be like, no, I'm not going to talk about that ever. And that's actually a way of like fixing conflict in place or maintaining power, stonewalling.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think for me, that's right. Like the idea that me having, let's say with a partner that I am deciding to do something secure with, like where we say this relationship is not casual in the sense, like, these words are all really complicated, right? Because they can mean different things. But for me, there's a difference between someone that I consent to be like, let's make out tonight, but we're not partners and we're not committing to security together. We're not building that. And we both talk about it. We agree. We have a nice time. We're friends, whatever. And it's an experience that passes. And the deepest bonds when we're like, I'm in this with you and I will be here for you. I will show up for you. And we're doing that mutually. And we decide we're building that. There are very different ways of doing things. And for me, the idea that was current in that sort of mid-2000s version of non-monogamy, that no one should ever have a boundary about what their partner does. That like, if I have a partner, I cannot decide who else they are intimate with. I should never, ever, ever, ever have a need that I can't have a veto, for example, or I can't be like, what was the M&Ms in the No Brendas? rule, is it Brenda's in what's his face in Savage Love? There's a famous column where his girlfriend, his partner, the person's partner is like, you can't date someone else with my name. She has a common name.
Wow.
There's a lot of people with her name, and she's like, you can't have any other Brendas because she's a Brenda or whatever it is, right? And he explained that as a legitimate need, as a valid need. That's like, and he used the M&M's example for like some rock stars who said one of their tests for whether people were going to be blue M&Ms. One of their tests for whether people were going to be safe to do all their pyrotechnics and not kill them on stage was, can they follow simple instructions like remove all of this color M&Ms from the bowl? And it may seem arbitrary, but it might be necessary for that person to deeply trust that their partner is going to be forthright and honest and respect the things that feel comfortable for them. I feel perfectly okay with that. It gets complicated when someone has to navigate that with 2 people or 3 people or 5 people. And for me, that means they have a lot of extra responsibility. Every new partner entails making sure that all of those people feel safe, if that's the level of commitment that you've made with one another. It's not to say that people shouldn't ever have relationships that are not that level of commitment. I think that's people's free choice. But when you're openly able to navigate that, I think it's a reasonable thing to ask of someone. And I didn't agree with the approach that says that that's always control. I thought that was a bit odd to say that those needs are controlling of the other person. I don't think that that's the case. I think it's more complicated than that.
Well, I would think it would be maybe a negotiation, sort of we can communicate about this. And it's one of the things that I've learned, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't actually done the work to determine what my attachment style is. I will after reading this book for the first time, is kind of wondering, where am I? But what was fascinating to me about what I came out of the book with was that there's not necessarily a right or wrong sort of form of it. I mean, because you can have an anxious attachment sort of style, and it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person or mean you're terrible at relationships. You just need to be aware of it and know how to kind of navigate that. So it's not like we can identify this is your attachment style. By definition, you're going to be a problem. And we could talk about that a little bit, I mean, because it's not to mention the fact that one person's attachment style and how they navigate it, may or may not match up with somebody else's. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be. This isn't like a horoscope where we can pick this out and say you're just a bad match for this person because you have this
Scorpio,
type of style.
so you can't date a Taurus.
Exactly, something like that. Yeah, because I mean, because that's not what we're looking at here. But it's, I think, what I enjoy about this aspect of it is it means I get to go learn something about myself and then sort of know how to navigate that into my relationships and kind of figure that out. And so one of the questions that I would ask to Jess, if I just had all the time in the world and could ask her a question, would be, who was that part of the book intended for? Is it for individuals? Is it for clinicians, for example? Or is this literally to help anyone or everyone? And I got the sense, and I think you actually mentioned this at some point, that the book isn't entirely just for people who are in non-monogamous relationships, because there's a lot of just general relationship helpful information in here. So, who was the intended audience of that sort of, these are the questions to ask, these are the things to, navigate while going through that?
Great question. And I want us to come to one of the questions in the side too after this. But yeah, I mean, I think I was writing it for people who are non-monogamous and feeling the attachment struggles come up because of being non-monogamous, right? That was, but then as I was writing it, especially in part 3, where I really talk about how do you do secure attachment with a partner without having to just depend on the structure of your relationship, but on the relationship experience. And how do you do secure attachment with yourself? I realized, this is for anybody, right? And some of my closest friends who are monogamous have read it and they're like, I haven't seen this in the other attachment books of just sort of the how-to aspect, And I think when we had early readers, I was pleasantly surprised about how many people said, all the therapists need this. And I was like, well, I guess that makes sense. I'm a therapist, So
yeah, I'm probably going to buy a copy for my therapist. No kidding.
Yeah, so, I've had several people say that now. So I think, yes, my hope actually is can be used as a resource for therapists or as therapists in training to become educated on it. But then, of course, it's really sort of for folks who are struggling with their attachment and want to move more into secure functioning.
Cool.
Yeah.
So building off of what Zach was just talking about, and the idea of attachment, the way, like the kind of popular way of thinking about attachment styles right now is like they're astrological signs.
Right.
And your take on that in a book is really different from that in a way that I found really interesting and helpful. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yes. So, and I'm not the only one, but it's harder to find. It's more like the technical attachment researchers who talk more about the dimensions of attachment, where you're either high or low on attachment anxiety, or you're high and low in attachment avoidance. But the way I see it is these are not rigid typologies where you just are one type and that's it, right? Because we can, even as a monogamous person, you can have a different attachment styles with your own parents, you know, if you had two parents. But in monogamy, we undoubtedly, there
56 for anyone that wants it.
we have different attachment styles can show up with different partners and depending on their attachment style. So we might be more, you know, anxious and preoccupied and leaning in, or we might be more withdrawn, depending on our partner. So, and that's what and even someone who just would say, no, I'm totally preoccupied. You give them long enough and eventually they start to show some of the avoidance stuff too, right? And you take someone who's, you know, always been withdrawing and avoidant and you get them in a certain situation and their anxiety and preoccupation is just so peaked, right? So I think it's better almost to just say it's an insecure attachment with that umbrella that sometimes, you know, is a little bit more anxious, is a little bit more avoidant. The other thing though is, you know, I really see these are survival strategies. Like given what someone went through, this was your wise adaptation. This was learned. And so therefore it can be healed and it can be unlearned or relearned, right? And we can have that earned secure attachment. So even if we had very difficult, traumatic, insecure attachment upbringing, it's not, you know, a forever sentence.
Okay. Wow.
And I like the. I was just going to say that I like the idea in the book that I think this was in the book, but I've also seen it elsewhere. But like you can actually heal your attachment within a relationship, and I think that one of the risks of the, like, you know, the full autonomy version of not like the you have to be completely secure in yourself all the time version of non-monogamy is like this idea that the sort of buffeting that you get from outside in the world can also be happening in your relationship, and you just have to take it. You just have to just be strong and just take it. And so this idea that actually, like, you know, your relationship needs to be a safe place for you. You know, you should be able to heal within it, not like consistently keep being injured and then have to go away and heal yourself. It's actually, no, this is a place for you to be safe and to heal. Like that shouldn't be revelatory, but I feel like in some corners of our subculture it might be. What were you going to say, Neva?
Yeah, no, that actually connects. I think we're asking two different prongs of a really similar question, which is in the nested model, I was interested because it was new for me to think about secure attachment with self as the center. It's like it's the little black circle in the middle of everything else, right? And I was curious. For me, I had understood security, as Eve is talking about, as something that we grow through relationship. And then when you experience it a lot, you organically have more stability within which to develop that inside yourself. And ideally that happens when we're growing up. But for those of us who don't get it growing up, we can then do it as adults with our partners or with close friends even, or with communities. And I was curious what the difference for you is between the possibility of building that security internally, which of course we have and is beautiful and powerful, and the obligation to do that, which is, I think, a bit more what Eve was talking about, where people are like, well, you just have to be secure in yourself. So if I did something that made you feel insecure, that's your problem. You know, what's the difference? Because they feel very different. And I think I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on
say it one more time for me. What's the
difference between that the possibility that we have that we can cultivate a security within ourselves? That is deep healing work that I think we do all have the ability to develop, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between that and the obligation to do that, which often it was treated as well, if you're feeling insecure because of something I'm doing, that doesn't, I'm doing something is irrelevant. You're just insecure and you have to deal with that by yourself because we're each only responsible for our own feelings. What's the difference for you between that
Right.
possibility maybe and that like shaming people who don't have that or working on it?
Right. Well, I think that this shaming people as you just have to deal with it yourself angle it's very reductionist, and it's missing all those other levels of our experience as humans, right? That attachment ruptures happen mostly in relationship, and so that is a beautiful place to heal relation to our attachment, right? And yet not the only.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're interdependent, interrelated, and it becomes that polylibertarianism, right? Where it just goes to an extreme, right? And it's actually can be quite isolating and damaging for people, which is very different than saying, I'm going to take on my own attachment healing and look at what I need to do to heal and create secure attachment within myself. But then I am going to use that at work or with my family or with my partners, right? And extend it to all the other realms. Yeah. Does that
almost as if, yeah, absolutely. It feels almost as if rather than a priority or a hierarchy, they move back and forth, like they're all occurring simultaneously.
Yeah, and I say that in the book. They all go up and down and impact each other, trickle down, trickle up. Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's such a powerful model.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Jess, good. Go ahead, Leaf.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that, like, going back to that shaming and the way it kind of intersects with the astrology model of attachment theory. Like, I think I've seen like the idea of an anxious attachment be it's like the new for people who know. Yeah, it's the new crazy ex-girlfriend, right? For people who are familiar with self-help language, it's like, well, I know I can't say she was crazy, so she was anxious attached, right? And also like this idea that I've heard that like, well, if you're anxious attached, then secure behavior looks like you don't care. So this dismiss. Yeah, I've heard. I know. But look, amazing. You want to say something about that, Jess? I've literally heard this. But it goes back to it goes back to that model of like, well, so she's a Scorpio, so she just reacts that way to everything, or whatever. Like a way of flipping it back onto like whatever's going on with that person instead of
It's very dismissive. It's very pathologizing. I just had it and then I lost it. I might need someone to jump in because I'll come.
That it erases context from people's life experiences. If we're thinking of people as part of a whole lifespan and not fragment, not cutting people up into bits based on what they can provide this partner or that partner, but thinking of them as whole. Where ideally, I think in our deepest relationships, we want to be known whole and we want to give that to one another. To rewrite in the cause effect of all of the experiences and across the lifespan that people are having and see ourselves as whole, I think.
Doesn't it also make the mistake, and correct me if I'm wrong, of assuming that someone's attachment style is immutable? Like this is your attachment style, it's never going to change. So she's a crazy ex-girlfriend because she's anxious, whatever, and is never going to change, can never improve, will never develop a more secure or less frightening attachment style. And so treating someone's attachment style, if you can actually identify it, as though it is a red flag permanently forever and there's no way to work around it, like you say, is ultimately very, very dismissive of the person, because it doesn't give anybody an opportunity to redeem their style or to just necessarily grow. In other words, it's the assumption that you're never going to grow.
Safety too, like that people grow,
and the idea that certain attachment behavior is also often a reaction to other behavior, right? So a secure person who is being treated in an avoidant way, or someone who is naturally has more of a like you were saying earlier, Jess, like it's possible for someone to be placed in a situation where they react avoidantly or they react in an anxious way. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're an avoidant, right? It just means that they're responding to a situation.
Mm,
Right.
right. Yeah.
Right. And I think there can be this myth of like the idealized secure person who has like nothing bothers them, like they never feel insecurity. And yeah, someone who's secure will still feel insecurity, but they can communicate, they can talk about it, or
Yeah.
they might sometimes say, I need space, and that's what's actually the secure response. Or
Right.
I need more time and attention from you, and that's a very secure request. Yeah. But I think I remember what I was going to say is this is a phenomenon where we can learn new language for succinct things, but it didn't necessarily elevate our perspective. It wasn't a vertical shift when we learned about it. I call it just a horizontal shift. It's like I'm using better language, but I'm still in the same mentality. That I would pathologize or rigidly type, somebody and dismiss them and not consider them in a compassionate way.
Right.
Yes.
Right? So,
right. I can change the language, but my framework for
my framework and perspective on how I see people is still exactly the same. Yeah.
A minute ago, Jess had said she wanted to address a question on the side. I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that now.
I think I actually got it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Could we ask you about some of the practical, like the chapters that are on, what do we do to form security in our poly relations? I'd love to ask you about that. Hear you talk about that.
I think people should get the book.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I think that this could be a whole other can of worms, but it goes back to when Nava was talking about like expectations within a secure bond versus expectations in a different kind of relationship, and something that I thought was really useful in the book is just the idea that we can actually have a conversation and say, are we doing attachment security? Do we make that commitment to each other, or are we not going to do that? Right. Yeah. And if we're doing it, then the whole set of expectations is different. And we're just on a different playing field than if we say like, no, we're not doing that. And I think some of what maybe people in earlier iterations of polyamory culture were trying to figure out is like, well, how do I protect this secure bond? And like, I'm going to try to have relationships that are not attachment secure. Right.
But people didn't have the language, so it wasn't understood.
Right. And so like, I think it's to accepting that like, okay, it's okay to be like, okay, I can only maintain like maybe 2 at most securely attached relationships, and I can have other lovers, but I am not going to do like those are not going to be attachment secure relationships. They can't be, because biology.
Because you can love an infinite number of people, but you cannot build an infinite number of secure bonds.
Yeah,
I don't think you can. That's the responsibility of each new relationship, is like to really genuinely explore what mutual needs are. And I think it's also for me around those conversations, not just that conversation, but even when you are in a secure relationship, conversations about boundaries are not a negotiation in the way that a union and an employer negotiate and they win and lose things. For me, it's deep mutual care about the other person. And I don't want you to do things that don't feel good for you. I don't want you to feel unsafe. So I'll be able to care about your needs, and you'll be able to care about my needs, both for autonomy and for closeness, rather than I come with my needs and you come with your needs and we work it out. Like for me, there's such a different model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think I saw something in the chat where someone was mentioning that attachment styles can change based on the relationship, because we've talked about this. Again, they're not immutable. You work through them. Even more so, and maybe I'm speaking for myself here from experience, but the attachment style can adjust based on something that happens within the same relationship. So you build a relationship with somebody, and either some event happens, some occurrence comes up, or rather that person gets into another relationship and suddenly your attachment style changes, either because of their behavior or your reaction to the new metamor or whatever. So it's one of those things that, again, the needle moves on a lot. But that, again, is that mobility that we're relating to the inherent instability of non-monogamy. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of and work through, and to intentionally address in each relationship because of those particular reasons. So, yeah,
And a lot of
absolutely.
times, what we see with the transition from being monogamous to polyamorous, let's say in a couple, is that in that same relationship, that transition moved them from feeling secure to totally insecure.
Right.
You know? And sometimes it's because they were just relying on structure and they didn't realize that they weren't treating each other so well, right? Or meeting each other's attachment needs at the levels they wanted. But sometimes they truly were a secure functioning couple, and just that paradigm shift just jostles it all up.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Fantastic.
I think that in polyamory, some of the harm that can come from not being able to communicate about this clearly and honestly, has to do with when there's inconsistency and like cognitive dissonance around whether we're doing like the language that we're using about security and the actions around security. So it's like, you know, if someone, like if we're looking at a model where it's like, I'm telling you that you're in an attachment secure, that we're doing attachment security, but then I'm acting insecurely. And I don't acknowledge that. If I tell you I'm going to honor this bond and I'm going to prioritize it, and then I act in ways that are not, that don't give me that felt sense, then that creates this cognitive dissonance that can be really harmful. Or on the other kind of harm that I've seen, and this is what was happening, I think, with people who, you know, under hierarchical polyamory were secondary partners. It's like you're being told you're not in a secure relationship. You are secondary. You don't have these rights, but the partner is then acting with you in a way that is secure. And in a way that's signaling to your brain and your body that you're developing that kind of a bond. And, you know, a friend of mine wrote about his experience of like being pulled in and violently shoved out at the same time.
Wow.
So, you know, she was being told, well, this is not a secure relationship, but then her partner was, and I had a similar experience to this early on when I was first opening, you know, doing open relationships, was like this understanding that I'm in this hierarchical structure where I have a very limited number of rights, but then my partner is inviting me in this way that's telling my brain that that real intimacy and love are available to me. Those things are not compatible. So, you know, I think
they would be for some folks, but you have to check whether they work for the person you're actually with.
Right.
Can you handle the feeling of being securely bonded when we happen to be together, but we aren't actually, and so you may need me, and I just will be like, I don't give a fuck, like a different day, or you know, because that's what we're doing, you know, like the mimicking of it without the real thing or the full thing. So that'll work for some folks, but you have to be able to genuinely have the conversation and find out what really works. I'm curious what it would take culturally and socially to make having these conversations really honestly even possible, because I feel like there's a lot of social pressure in many directions, social pressure towards monogamy, or social pressure to be cool and not have needs, or there's so many constraints around being able to speak genuinely and honestly without shame of any kind, and then find folks that we can do things with where it actually is true that it works for people, you know? It's about that.
Wow. It's actually, yeah, I mean, maybe it's because of the circles that I am sometimes around, or the people I interact with who are in non-monogamy, but those of us that try to do this, you know, intentionally, consensually, and, you know, and be very, very aware, do more talking about this, you know, and I would say the four of us, reasons we're so excited about this book. It's like, hey, here's something else we're
whole
going to talk about.
Set of tools,
Yeah, again, it's all these
More
tools and all
talking.
these, you know, I'm listening to this, and of course I'm listening to the book, and I'm listening to the discussion about the quadrants, and I was like, okay, which quadrant is mine, you know? And this is fantastic, you know, as someone who is both studying to be a clinician, who is studying to be a counselor, but also is myself non-monogamous and has multiple relationships, and just thinking about these things and thinking, fantastic, this is more stuff we can use to talk about, you know, as far as the way we go about doing things. And it's, I think we mentioned earlier, and I kind of wanted to circle back to it in a little bit. It's almost as though, as this thing that's known as non-monogamy or polyamory moves along through time, as it were, I mean, earlier, Eve was talking about how the book was written in 2013, 2014 for, well, more than two, which seems like forever ago because 2020 has lasted about 10 years. But the fact that, we're always coming up with new language, there's more ways of looking at this because there's more literature out there now. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this book is because it can be given to clinicians and, and be used as something. But I'm wondering where anybody on the panel, but particularly Jess, would see the next step in the zeitgeist going. What would be the conversations we'd have in another 5 or 6 years, after we start really, putting this secure attachment sort of model into polyamory, and those of us who are trying to have these conversations and being very intentional about things when we don't have so much external support, because again, we're kind of winging this in a lot of cases. What do you think would be the next step? What would you like to either see non-monogamy go, or what do you think it will go to as far as the zeitgeist?
Good question. I might need a moment for that one. I'm actually
That's
hearing
fine.
Robin Trask, though. I'm hearing her answer to this would be like
Uh-oh.
the legal rights around all of these things. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
like,
man.
that would, the societal level of actually having rights and access would be a big one. I think, yeah.
Okay.
For those who don't know, you want to tell us who Robin Trask is?
She is.
I mean, I know, but tell the.
So do I. Yeah.
I think we all know. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, she runs Loving More.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and hosts Rocky Mountain Poly Living, and is it Loving More Philadelphia? Is that the Philly?
Poly Living in Philly.
Poly Living in
Yeah.
Philly. Yeah,
Right.
she does amazing advocacy work, and she's been committed to it for decades.
Yeah.
But there's something about, I'm even thinking of, for some reason, the idea of capitalism is coming in, of just like, how much is our polyamory, non-monogamy influenced by capitalism, and like more.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that? That's really interesting.
And also acquisitive and contract based and individualist, all of these larger kind of neoliberal cultural influences that for some reason, maybe unsurprisingly, have made their way into this language in a way that I think is incredibly destructive.
Yeah, right. And I think what I hope this attachment conversation actually brings people to is like, let's be honest about how much you can actually do. Because it's harming your partners. It's harming yourself,
Yeah.
And like you had mentioned, and I've said, it's like, love can be infinite. You can have desire for a lot of folks, but time is finite, and the investment of secure bonds, if that's what we want, we don't have to have that, of course, takes time and attention. And so I think
and subtlety. The signals. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I cutting you off? I didn't know.
I'll just say one more thing. I mean, I think there's potentially this pendulum swing we're seeing of like, you can only have this much in relationship. And now we're like, no, look, you can have all of this. This is amazing, right? And it is. And I'm wondering if then we're going to move more into this, just like, okay, but what do I really need, or what's really needed? What's really supportive on all these different levels? But and
that coming back to something that Eve was talking about a moment ago, around when the words or the agreements do one thing, but the actual lived experience of intimacy is doing something different, and that can happen in all these in monogamous relationships and in many kinds of, it's not unique to non-monogamy. But I think what's been so revelatory for me about understanding attachment has been that its attunement is very subtle.
Yes.
Like someone can make agreements with me all they like, but if when they're with me, they're far away, then we're not going to be secure. We're not going to really feel, I mean, of course, sometimes we're far away. Sometimes we're daydreaming or we're distracted or we're stressed or whatever. It's not that people need to be perfect, but that if people don't know the difference between attuned, connected, solid presence and the image of that or the story of that, then there may be things happening that are genuinely producing of insecurity that are not being named, or we can't quite get our finger on it. We can't really go, actually, I feel less secure with you, even though you're keeping our agreements,
Yeah.
than someone that we don't have a ton of agreements, but I really know that they're with me, even if
Yeah.
they live in Scotland and like they're not physically here. You can have someone like a close, a partner that I was with for 7 years, and literally the week that we got together, within a couple of months, he was on a glacier in Norway for a month. But I felt secure with that person, even though we'd only been together for a couple of months. He had that invite to go away almost as soon as the relationship began.
Mm.
But there was this presence. There was this sense of security that had been cultivated, and I think that that's possible. And it's important to be able to talk about those subtle ways that it's not about negotiation and contracts and agreements, and it's partly about keeping your promises, but it's about more than that, I think.
Yeah.
To be able to have
Fantastic.
language for that is really helpful. But we didn't get to. I am curious. Would you talk about some of the what folks can do, or were you joking when you said people should buy the book? Because I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Great. Playfully joking. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, let's get back to that.
I mean, I'll give
the book is almost 300 pages, so they've got to buy the book no matter what, because we can't cover the fraction of what's in it.
And it is worthwhile. It's going to be a reference, I think, for the future. So but by all means.
So there's a different, I guess, ways I talk about the things you can do. And one of the first, Eve, you were kind of referencing is well, do we even want to be attachment based? You don't have to, right? We can have many connections, relationships, or lovers that don't have to be meeting each other's attachment needs in that sort of shared, agreed, committed way. So that's one thing, is just getting clarity together on, is that what we're doing? And then if the answer is yes, it's really working on, how do we become a safe haven and a secure base for each other? Mm-hmm. And so I come up with the acronym of HEARTS, and looking at, first is H is here, being present together. E is emotionally engaged, or is that express delight? Sorry, right? Express delight. And then attunement is right in that center of the heart. Rituals and routines. And then, you got it.
Oh, I can pull it up. Hang on. Yeah, here. Yeah, at the bottom there.
Yes. And then turning towards after conflicts, right? Knowing that ruptures are inevitable, and how we repair ruptures is what actually creates secure attachment, not the fact that, of course, we have fights. And then working on secure attachment with self. So in the book, I sort of walk through different things people can do, different questions they can work on with themselves and their partners, to explore all those different aspects. Yeah.
Oh, we've got a question about.
I know we have a good question. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. Zach, do you want to read it?
If I can find it. Hang on, let me see. From whom? I'm looking at two different pages.
Aaron Mack, the newest question here.
Yeah, okay, the newest Mac. So it said, join late, so forgive me if I missed it. But how do you all think COVID has affected people's experience of feeling or needing secure attachment in relationships at this moment in time? And Aaron said, you all, so I'm guessing that's all of us, but you guys go first so I can think about it.
Does anyone want to jump in on that? Or you want me to say something first?
Oh, you go first.
Yeah. There was an Onion article that said, Portland polyamorous woman accidentally picked wrong boyfriend to quarantine with. It was something like that, right?
That's perfect.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think COVID and quarantine and social distancing, I'm seeing it really be difficult for my clients. And in some ways, it has brought hierarchy into relationships that it wasn't. They were doing non-hierarchy really well, and then they can't because there's a child with this person, or this person has an autoimmune condition, right? And then, so I'm seeing that really impacts the non-monogamous community in another way. And then just, there's so much uncertainty, and a lot of people are feeling so much fear.
Our attachment systems are activated a lot because of the fear.
Exactly. And so they are needing more, right? They are needing more of that self-regulation and the co-regulation. let's soothe our nervous systems together. And sometimes we do
Yeah.
need other to help us soothe our own nervous system. Right? But then I'm also seeing people, to that joke of being quarantined with the wrong person, right? That a lot of people, they're spending more time than they ever had, and they're needing more, they're finding themselves become even more avoidant because it's just too much contact.
Too much.
So I'm seeing it go in all directions. Yeah.
Yeah, or it can push people. In my case, I think I'm actually developing a lot. It's interesting timing that I'm reading all of this about secure attachment in the self, because my roommate moved in with their brother, and I found myself living alone for the first time in my 43 years of life. And I thought I would hate it, and it turns out it's great. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to get a roommate again. Whoa, this is actually kind of nice. Like, once there is that space, I've had 2 really amazing partners over my adult life, pour care into me, and a lot of body workers, and then you do start to develop security within the self that has nothing to do with anything external, and it's really quite powerful. So I think that COVID is pushing people further into whatever path they're on.
Yeah.
For my part, I am solo poly and but live alone and always have. And so I live alone. I work from home. I'm always a natural introvert, so I didn't do a lot of like socializing. What COVID has done for me is make me re-examine the wisdom of basically all my relationships being long distant. Because it was, just a whole lot of me and these 4 walls and the dog. But that being said, though, I have found that in being intentional about communicating with partners and talking to folks, I have found that I do find ways to communicate and to connect and attach with people, whether they be friendships, whether they be special friendships or partners and things like that, from a distance, via this very vehicle right here that we're using right now, because it's basically all we have. And so, but being intentional about, spending time with those folks and making sure those connections, I did not want, the distance and the distance being longer artificially, to be the thing that ended up causing those changes. And so, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it sucks because, after 6 months, just about anybody would be touch starved. And, I have tried to make some efforts to see some people, whenever I can, not a lot. But I am in a place where I think the connections that I have been able to make during this time have been, I don't know whether I diagnose them as securely or not, but they feel good, and I feel good about them. Now, at some point, I would love to move past this COVID crap and look back at 2020 and be able to laugh and say, remember that time when we didn't get to see each other for like 10 months in person, but then all of a sudden, we saw each other in person, and that first hug that lasted for like 3 hours was amazing.
Oh my God.
That type of thing, right? Yeah. So very much looking forward to that moment. I'd like to be able to have the option. I mean, I still am going to live alone and whatnot, but I want to be able to have the option to say, you know what, road trip, I'm jumping in a plane, I'm going to go drive to see somebody or something, and just spend a weekend with some.
Road
Road trips. Well, yeah, I mean, it's, Jesse, if you guys know, I mean, the cons was, basically where I ended up meeting people. And when, and if I can't go to conferences or conventions, this is when I learned very, very quickly. That's where I socialize, because other than that, and so it's all been virtual stuff, right? I mean, that's literally, those are my people, and that's when I go to see them. And, I haven't done any of that since February. So it's been a challenge. But, as far as attachments, I have found that I have been able to maintain some pretty comfortable, secure, I'm not going to define them as safe or anything like that, but really good connections with people, because you have to be intentional and you have to work at it through this medium. You can't just assume that the touch is going to do half of the work for you. So I've gotten better at the verbal, I think, because of it.
Yeah. One thing I'll say too, though, with COVID, for my clients who are more anxious, preoccupied styles, and they're still doing like social distance dating, I'm like, oh, good, it's slowing you down.
That too. It is useful.
Interesting.
Right. You can't just like bond and like move in and like do all the things where you spend every moment for the first week together. Like, good. Making you, see things at a clear pace.
Yeah, you have to have a conversation for 2 weeks before it's safe to be in the same space with that person, and
Interesting.
Yeah. Eve,
Yeah.
add anything to the
I'm just gonna say fuck COVID. That's all I've got to say about that.
Well, okay.
I'm with that one too. That works because yeah, absolutely,
I
definitely.
think connecting it to the nested model is actually really interesting because it's not just COVID, it's also impending societal collapse, and the election and white supremacy, and there's so many, and climate change and fires. There's so many things happening simultaneously that I think are activating our attachment systems and in kind of initiating the need to go towards others and trust others and go close and know who's in this with us, because there are so many different concatenations of simultaneous crises that are happening right now. I teach speculative fiction, and I'm thinking a lot about Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower this week because we were doing it in class, and the sense that there's so many simultaneous crises occurring at the same time really pushes people to feel the need for our interdependence, or on the other hand, to feel that no one will really be there, and so it's best to just do it yourself and have your own. And that's where we get pushed further into these kind of capitalist narratives of into self-reliance and making money. And
What's
I
interesting
think
about
that
everything you just mentioned is that it's affecting everyone simultaneously. I mean,
we're having a shared experience of
we're all going
dislocation
through
and
shared trauma.
disconnection.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I think in a way this gets into the deeper questions of what attachment bonds can do for us socially, culturally, ecologically, politically, that we exist within these larger webs. We're not just individuals moving through the world picking things, that we already exist in these webs whether we like it or not. We don't actually have a choice about that. What we do have a choice about is whether we look at them and nourish them in a way that doesn't engulf and doesn't abandon, that is able to be whole while being in relationship. And I think your book is really doing a beautiful job of moving the conversation in that direction.
Cool.
I wonder if you feel like chatting about that a little, or I don't know. I'm sure you've been thinking about this stuff. I can see it in the book. So
real quick before we go any further, I want to throw out something. We're coming up on almost 10 minutes of time left, and I wanted anybody who may be watching right now, if they have a question, now's the time to put it up so we can try and catch it if we can, and then we'll let Jessica respond. But we'll let folks who are in the chat know now's the time you put your questions up. I'll be scanning, looking for them, and we'll see if we can get these up here while we've got a little bit of time left.
Okay, thank you.
Can you say the question again?
Yeah, I just what I'm seeing in the book that's speaking to me so beautifully. There's so many things there. The practical stuff is really helpful, but there's also this sense of interdependence at the social and political scale, and I find that's really personal for me because we're experiencing multiple simultaneous concatenations of crisis that activate our attachment systems. People are like, that's what all the prepping I think is about. Right? Left-wing preppers, right-wing preppers, they're all like, who's in this with me? Who's going to go to the compound with me and get the guns or whatever, especially in the States, And I'm like, I just want to know that if I'm in danger, that I know that I can trust the closest people to me, whether they're geographically close or not, to show up and be there. I think that's an attachment need, right?
Right.
And I think that that's the larger gift that secure bonds, not only with partners, but with friends, with family, with siblings. I loved that you talked about siblings, with the larger extended families, with the communities, and also with the earth, ecologically, politically, that allows us strength to hold together so that we can resist and work together to build things.
Right.
I feel like that's the larger conversation that your book is helping move us in that direction. And I was curious if that's something you would want to chat about or think about with us.
Yeah, let me think. I can feel it. I'm in the feel of it and the thought of it. I'm just like, yes.
Makes me think of one of my favorite songs, which is about kissing behind the barricades. And the idea that we're in this, whatever's going on, we're in this together.
Yeah, that we need to have our relationships not rupture when there's danger happening, in order to be able to build together. And that's the political time that we're in, right? Is that folks are learning how to do that while experiencing a lot of rupturing. And I think that thinking of it in attachment terms is so beautiful.
Yeah.
That we can be stronger together when we can hold these relationships in these ways. I don't know if that resonates.
Well, it's actually resonating very personally at the moment, of just seeing, my partner Shane and I actually moved in together because of the pandemic, and like every few weeks we'll high five, like, look at us, like navigating the pandemic in a book launch and a move to Costa Rica, like but it, I think it's felt very like, because of our secure functioning and the foundation that we laid, we've been able to see that togetherness happen. But I think if I think about a lot of my clients, so many people don't feel like we are all experiencing something simultaneously, but a lot of people don't feel togetherness in that. There was even something in the comments of someone feeling like how many local E&M people treat the pandemic as a non-issue and behave in such a cavalier way. And it's been heartbreaking. And Erin says that. And it's like, yeah, Erin, you're not the only one who said that, where some people feel like, oh, my partners or my friends or my non-monogamous community isn't being safe. And yet other people feeling like maybe their community is, and they feel highly supported by that. So.
Right. And it's, as Zach said, it's when we can't have physical spaces that we usually are accustomed to gathering where those communities happen, it's really much more dependent on the relationships we already happen to have. So that's a lot of it's very power informed. Right?
I mean, it's a new kind of world that we're all navigating and having to survive. And I think that's what's, again, so unique about it is, I think Brene Brown explained it as like we're all going through the exact same trauma at the exact same time. And it, not to mention the fact that for just about everybody, this is all our first global pandemic. Most of us have never had to deal with this kind of thing before.
I was not alive in 1917.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, and certainly to this level in a world where supposedly we're, so very, very connected, and yet here comes this little virus coming along and say, you guys aren't really that connected. I mean, we may communicate more.
We're like
and
more
communicate
connected than
easier.
we thought. And
well, we communicate easier, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily more connected, and it certainly doesn't mean that we're more attached. Now we can be, and we can work through that, but it's sort of I think if anything it's kind of shown us that, what, if you're going to form attachments, just because you can talk to somebody on the other side of the world doesn't mean you and that person are necessarily connected. I mean, you can communicate and whatnot, but how do you connect? And the reality is, for humanity, connection is, individual is person to person, and oftentimes it happens in person. Now, I think you can connect long distance because throughout this, the most of this year, this calendar year, we've all had to find ways to connect with people that are just different. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, is that I think that I have found ways to be able to connect with people outside of the fact that, and it's not just because, well, I'm an introvert and I'm just funny about going out and meeting people in public spaces. It's because everyone has had to stay at home, and so at a minimum, people like me are suddenly on the same playing field as everyone else.
It's actually been a little easier for introverts than for everybody.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. At first, I've got extroverted partners and extroverted friends who within, I'm going to say 15 to 30 days were going bonkers. And I mean, I work from home, I live alone, I didn't go out that much anyway. And, when the first hardcore lockdown came down, I mean, I was just kind of sitting here like, okay, cool. So I'm going to do this. We're just going to wait this thing out. Well, waiting this thing out became, now it's, a month, now it's 2 months, now it's 3 months, here we are 6-7 months later. And as Erin, alluded to, some people, I think, reacted in different ways. Some folks just lost it and said, to hell with this, I can't do this anymore. And just said that they'd rather pretend like that this pandemic isn't going on.
Happening at all.
Some people started trying to find ways to sort of mitigate, but yet assume certain types of risk. And I actually talked to somebody that I know that's a therapist who kind of mentioned the sort of this idea that abstinence only never works in anything, including this. And so you have to assume that at a certain point, people are going to start venturing out. A permanent lockdown for like a year or something isn't going to work because somebody's going to start coming out, and everyone does it differently. But I think that's where those connections and those conversations come up, because it's like, okay, if I can, mitigate the risk to me myself because I live alone, and that's good for me. But if my partner doesn't live alone and they've been around family or something, then that's when we start having those conversations. So anyway, that's I think that COVID has been a very, very unique sort of new thing to throw onto this attachment as far as just human beings attaching to other human beings. So, and yeah, we're like I said, a couple more minutes left. I'm gonna do one more scan to see if there's any more
questions. Yeah, Alicia, it's great to see you on here, as well as you, Trish. Alicia, I don't know if you were here in the earlier part where we talked about, yes, the book does talk about the 4 classic styles, but not as rigid typology, more as the dimensions and the spectrum. So hopefully that's helpful. And then, does someone want to read Jackie's question?
I was just reading it now, so I'll go through it. Jackie says, I've been thinking about the ways that COVID has changed my relationships to be closer when I'm more avoidant, and how the enforced monogamy has created those quote unquote safety structures to sort of allow for healing and relaxing in a way that I think may not have been possible without it, even though I wouldn't have chosen that. Do you have any advice around that? I don't. Go for it, Jess.
I don't know if it's advice. Absolutely. I've seen this as well, is that there has been I like what you're saying, the enforced monogamy has created certain safety structures that have let certain relationships get more time and attention and focus and healing that was needed. And like they wouldn't have chosen that, right? And yet the benefit is undeniable. Right. And then I do talk a little bit in the last chapter about, when like we're really experiencing attachment ruptures, do we close? Do we stay open? And I think this is very taboo, I know, but there are times when closing for a while is the best thing for everyone involved. And I give the caveats to that, where you're not just ghosting people and letting go and dismissing people, that everyone involved can actually be on board. But there are times when that is, if there's a real extreme attachment insecurity going on, that really can be the medicine that's needed. It's just not forever. It's forever.
I actually, when I got to that part and I saw you start to talk about that, I was like, oh, where's she going to go with this? And then I saw the way you really carefully and with so much compassion walked through, like, how do you take care of everyone? And I loved that you did that, and that you did it with so much care.
Yeah. And, I know not everyone's going to like to read some of that. And some people are going to love it, they're going to be like, right now.
Yeah, well, if you're reading a self-help book and you don't feel a little bit attacked, then maybe it's not for you. But yeah, so I'm looking and it looks like we're pretty much up against the time that we expected to use. This is the type of conversation that you're just not going to get done no matter how much time you do, and we could definitely talk more about it. And who knows, maybe it's up to Thorntree Press if we decide to have another conversation about this. But I wanted to thank definitely all the guests, our author, Jessica Fern, the author of the book Polysecure, Thorntree Press, and Rickert, who's also published the book and wrote the foreword, and then Nava as well. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for inviting me to be here. To everyone who's listening, the book is fantastic. Definitely, I think it's going to be a game changer and absolutely worthwhile. It's called Polysecure by Jessica Fern. If I recall correctly, it actually drops on October 23rd. So one week from today. It is available for pre-order wherever you pre-order books. I have already got at least 2 copies myself on the way. So by all means, definitely worthwhile. Go check it out. And who knows, if there are going to be more conversations needed coming up, then I'm happy to come back and do this again. So thank you all for listening. Thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Zach, so much for this beautiful hosting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for being here, Jess and Eve and Zach. It's so nice. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yes.
I see there's some folks in Montreal. Hi, Montreal.
Thank you. Right. This is great. It was lovely to see you all too.
Yes.
And we'll I'm sure these conversations will continue.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I'm supposed to, definitely.
All right.
Bye.